Irish Nation, welcome back to episode 2, where we're going to cover the offensive side of Notre Dame football, entering season 5 of Irish Talk, your Notre Dame football analytics podcast. Mike, on our first episode, we were trying to figure out if we were in season 3 or 4 of Irish Talk. Here we're in season 5, so not the best look for the two analytics guys that can't even count to 5.
Yeah, pretty brutal, and it's on both of us. So we'll have to figure out how many Malort shots we need to take in order to rectify that. So I'm gonna call something out for our listeners. If you're actually watching on YouTube, you might notice that Brett has what appears to be a sling on his shoulder. So Brett, do you want to tell our listeners and viewers how you got that? Spoiler alert for everyone: Brett was not running into a burning building to save a bunch of children, and I think I'll kick it over to you, and you can tell everyone how it happened.
Fair enough. So I separated my shoulder via tearing a ligament. I'm going to have surgery in a couple of weeks. So devastating news out of summer camp for Irish Nation. I honestly did it looking like the 2023 Notre Dame wide receiver room. We were at a bachelor party for Alex, longtime listener of the show. His mom, Jen, is one of our biggest fans. So shout out to Alex and Jen and the entire family. And we were playing catch with a football in the yard, and I tried tipping a pass to myself, and being the not quite as athletic as I once was 34-year-old, stumbled, tripped, dove, laid out, fell. I don't know the right verb for it, but very ungracefully went to the ground, landed on my shoulder, and that's all she wrote. So we're going to be dinged up here for a little bit, but won't get in the way of Irish talk, and hopefully won't have an impact on the field for Notre Dame this year.
Yeah, this happened in the midst of a couple of other injuries for Notre Dame. Kedron Young, that was a season-ending injury that I think happened the same day, and then Kevin Bauman was right around the same time too. And Brett, when you had this injury, I told you, I said, hey, in my book, the Brett shoulder tearing, for me, that is the story of the roster right now. This is the story of Notre Dame football, the biggest injury in my book. So we were saying hopefully this will just be, we can look back, and the Notre Dame team will help from this point on, and we'll just say that this was a sacrifice that you made, a blood sacrifice in order to preserve the health of the team from this point forward.
Look, I've still got 4 years of eligibility, and my doctor said I should be cleared to return to the field here for the college football playoff. So I can also just do, Charles Juggus at 2.0 and make a run in December, but seems pretty unlikely given my lack of ability to catch a football. But with that, let's move into previewing Notre Dame's offense, which is hopefully slightly better at passing and catching the football. Mike, let's start with the offensive line. We had 3 big transfers out. We bring back 5, what I'll call starters. It felt like between the 3 transfers, Tosh Baker, who graduates, and the 5 guys coming back with injuries last year, we really had 9 different guys get meaningful starting action. How do we feel, though, about the 5 coming back versus the 3 going out? Any concern that Notre Dame fans should have going into the season on the O-line?
So the 5 coming into fall camp, and I'll say the 5 coming into the summer, actually, because Jagasaw, he got hurt in an ATV accident. Those guys have always been the top 5 in the coaching staff's mind. So it's Wagner at right tackle, Knapp at left tackle. Jagasaw would have been at right guard before he got injured, Schrouth at left guard, and then Craig at center. So in my mind, these and the coaching staff's mind, these have always been the top 5 guys. I mentioned Jagasaw got hurt. It looks like Apsher is going to fill in. He's a highly touted recruit, top 100, big frame, someone who has the profile of another great Notre Dame offensive lineman. We obviously haven't seen him yet, so remains to be seen how he'll slot in. But that it seems like that's who's being pegged to potentially fill the spot. But I think the cause for concern from a lot of people outside, I would say outside of the Notre Dame circles, is just because there were some high profile offensive linemen that transferred out who got a lot of playing time down the stretch. And that was, Pat Coogan and Rocco Spindler were 2 of the most notable. They graded out amongst the best in our offensive line last year. But the reason they really played a lot was because of injuries. So Jagasaw was hurt. Craig was hurt last year. And so these guys were able to get playing time whereas they might have might not have otherwise. And that's not to say that they didn't fill in and do a great job, because they did do a great job. But if those injuries hadn't happened, I'm not sure that they would have seen quite as much playing time. And that's not to say that these guys are not losses, because I think Spindler and Coogan would be very, very valuable reserves, especially now that we had someone like Jagasaw go down. But from a frontline standpoint, it's not as impactful as maybe the headlines would have you to believe. And then another name I'm going to throw in here is Pendleton. Pendleton was someone who played earlier in the year and then fell off a bit near the end. But I think those three guys I mentioned, that's 6 through 8, so very valuable depth. And each one of those players, they are players who would start pretty much anywhere else, which is what we're seeing. They went to Nebraska, Tennessee, and then I'm blanking on the last Indiana. But yeah,
Indiana.
they're all slotting in as starters at those places. So these are guys who would be valuable. Like I said, we're already seeing some injuries, so they're people who maybe we would already be drawing in on. But I think when you look at the front line, I think there's still a lot of optimism. It's most of the offensive linemen that we pegged as our top offensive linemen. They're poised to start this year, Jagasaw notwithstanding.
Yeah, and even as we look at snaps played and the Pro Football Focus grade, so kind of quantity of playing time and quality of playing time. First off, Pro Football Focus grade. If you're following along on YouTube here, we've got this graph up for our listeners. I'll walk through it. It's subjective. It's also not opponent adjusted. You look at a guy like Ashton Craig. He's the one that dealt with the most serious injury last year. I think he only played 3 or 4 games. So that's really the NIU game and Texas A&M. Like he didn't get a lot of meaningful reps, and when he did, the entire offensive line, if we remember, really went into last year with no experience and was looking to gel. And so I think that Ashton Craig, the team always viewed as the coaching staff always viewed as the starting center. On the other side, Anthony Knapp was a true freshman last year. Didn't grade out particularly well. He graded out like an average starter, but I think the staff is clearly, by the playing time they gave him last year, sees high potential and are making that bet. Wagner, very obvious choice, like incredibly productive, highest grade on the offensive line. Jagasaw, I think a really obvious choice, just given a real blue chip talent, someone that really before his injury in last summer camp, and now again, breaking his arm in an ATV accident, kids stay off of 4-wheelers. The staff clearly views him as one of the most talented guys in that position group. I think the interesting coin flip was Spindler versus Shrouth. Like Pat Coogan was definitely the backup center last year. That's how he was viewed and really got playing time because of injuries. Sam Pendleton, frankly, started at the beginning of the year, lost his job despite other guys around him getting hurt. I thought those two were pretty obvious. It was Shrouth versus Spindler. I think one of the interesting things for Notre Dame fans to pay attention to is we're going to be starting 2 sophomores and 3 juniors. That's a lot of depth that, maybe could Emil Wagner play his way into a first, second round draft pick this year? Maybe. I think there's a pretty good chance this entire 5 is not only going to be our starting 5 this year when everyone's healthy, when Jugusah's back, as you've mentioned, but could also be the starting 5 next year in 2026. I don't think we've had that level of returning production. Probably got to go back to really, I think, 2019 when you had Eichenberg, Banks, Hainsey, and Kramer. They were all together in 2018, and 4 of those guys also came back in 2020. And that first year in 2018, they were a pretty average pass blocking team and a really good run blocking team. That sounds a lot like our team last year. In 2019, they jumped up to be the 2nd best pass blocking team and the 11th best run blocking team, and they sustained that in 2020. I think that's a big opportunity here for Notre Dame. I think it was maybe part of the reason why the coaching staff leaned into guys like Knapp and Shrouth, who are sophomores and just have a lot more eligibility left to play together.
Definitely. And I think a little more context on these Pro Football Focus grades too. I mean, we mentioned Coogan and Spindler 2 and 3, right? So that's impressive. But Knapp, I mean, the staff is certainly leaning into this upside that you're hinting at, Brett. So someone like Knapp, true freshman, right? So took his lumps. It's not like he's had a ton of time to reap the benefits of being in a college strength and conditioning program, and also reap the benefits of being in a nutritional program as well. So I would expect a pretty large jump in how he grades out this year. Someone like Shrouth, I think that there were moments last year where he was our best lineman when he was fully healthy. It's just he was pretty dinged up for a lot of the year. So his grade is lower than Spindler and Coogan, but when he was healthy, I think it was pretty clear that he was above those 2 guys. We mentioned Jagasaw. He graded out well, didn't get a ton of reps, but I think what was most impressive with him was just how he stepped in after such a long period of time off and played well. So it's unfortunate we're not getting him back until the middle of the year, but he's shown that he has an ability to step in and play well on very short notice. Craig,
I think.
oh, go ahead, Brett.
Sorry, no, keep going on Craig.
I was going to say, Craig, yeah, again, very, very limited data set. So that I would say if there's one that if you're looking at here, you have, you could pick at maybe a little bit more, it would be Craig, but the staff clearly sees him as the best option. And so I think the staff has certainly earned the benefit of the doubt, in my opinion. I feel comfortable with them rolling forward with Craig in that starting position.
And I think the one watch out, if there is one for our offensive line, question I hear a lot is what is Pro Football Focus doing? Of course, Notre Dame had a great offensive line last year. Top 5 in SP+. We had Jeremiah Love running the ball everywhere. We had Riley Leonard running the ball everywhere. There weren't a lot of sacks. Well, Riley Leonard, Jeremiah Love, and Jadarian Price made the offensive line look really good. The average quarterback will take a sack 17% of the time that they're under pressure. Riley Leonard's was only 12%. So Riley Leonard, in theory, should have taken 50% more sacks than he did. He just had really great escapability and strength in the pocket. Similarly, Leonard, Love, and Price broke an insane amount of tackles. They broke tackles on 29% of Notre Dame's runs last year. The average is about 20%. So Jadarian Price was one of the top 10 running backs in the country, really behind Ashton Genty in yards after contact. That made this, offensive line look good when Jadarian Price, Jeremiah Love were just out there doing their thing. And a lot of times were dead to rights, like had no business getting big chunk plays. And they did because of their own ability. I am a big believer, though, offensive lines require time to gel. With all the injuries last year, we didn't have it. With all the guys coming back this year, we should. I think that's a big reason to believe the offensive line is really going to anchor this entire unit. With that, let's move into the big off-season topic, the quarterback battle. We've got two guys, both homegrown recruits in Kenny Minchey, CJ Carr. Mike, walk us through what your thoughts are on the biggest headline that's going on in Notre Dame summer camp.
It's a 50-50 battle between those two guys, which is, I think, surprising to a lot of people. I want to say coming out of spring ball, like when Angeli departed and seemingly ceded any possibility of getting the starting spot, most people assumed that meant CJ Carr was going to get it. For a profile on these two guys, I would imagine many of our listeners are already familiar with them, but I think it's worth talking about it again, just because this is so essential to the fate of Notre Dame this year. But the profile of these two guys is with Carr, he was a top 50 overall recruit. He has some ability, although certainly nothing like a Riley Leonard. But if you give him space, he can definitely make you pay. The big calling card with him is arm talent. So he's someone who has not a cannon, but definitely a strong arm. Can make all the throws that you would like. He's very accurate, and he's also he grew up in a football family, grandson of Lloyd Carr. So someone who, from a processing standpoint, understanding the X's and O's, is someone you'd expect to be ahead of the curve. So just in terms of processing offenses, being able to make all the tough throws and then delivering it accurately, that's where he excels. Someone who you would hope would be able to really elevate the passing game in your offense. Now, the other person, Kenny Minchey, highly touted as well, although not as highly touted. He was about a top 150 recruit. The reason he, I think, has gotten lost in the shuffle a little bit, maybe hasn't gotten as much attention, is because he was in that recruiting class where Notre Dame was going after Dante Moore, who was a top 5 overall player, 5-star. And it seemed like for a while Notre Dame was going to land that person. It didn't happen. And then Notre Dame, unfortunately, I hate to say settled, because Minchey isn't someone, I would say a player like him, you're really not settling. He's a good player. But I think compared to someone like a top 5-star, many fans view that as us settling and kind of getting our backup option. But since he arrived in the program, he is, I think, continued to impress, continue to exceed expectations. His profile it's not a dual threat either, but he's a bit more mobile than CJ Carr. He's someone who, if a play breaks down, he can be a little bit more creative. He can kind of he can do well in chaotic situations. And he has arm talent as well. Maybe from a recruiting profile standpoint, maybe his arm talent doesn't project out quite the same as someone like CJ Carr, but someone who can be accurate, someone who can make difficult throws as well. So it's not really a situation where you're choosing between a pure pocket passer and a dual threat. It's guys who have elements of both and kind of lean a little bit one way or lean the other. So similarities between these two. The question is really just who's going to end up winning out. And every time I read a report out of camp, everyone's insisting it's a 50-50 battle after, rewind the clock 6 months ago, everyone was insisting it was going to be CJ Carr who won it. I think if you really asked the beat reporters if they had to pick who they would go with, I think most would still go with CJ Carr, but there certainly is a lot more doubt in those predictions than there was in the past.
Yeah, and I think a lot of Notre Dame fans are buzzing of like, does that mean CJ Carr is struggling and losing the job? I don't think so. Like, everyone wants to talk about how high CJ Carr is. He's the seventh highest QB recruit that Notre Dame's ever had since 24/7 started tracking this stuff. But Kenny Minchey's the 13th highest. Like, Kenny Minchey's a really great recruit. He's been in the system for 2-3 years. I view this, I know everyone's waiting for that generational quarterback to be developed. I know we ranked dead last in passing game explosiveness last year, and we're looking to take a step forward. But we don't need this quarterback to come in and be Trevor Lawrence or Jalen Hurts or Tua or Joe Burrow. We need this quarterback to come in and be a really solid distributor of the football. And so I think expectations are really high because of the roster. But I think expectations for quarterback should be pretty measured for what we need. And it's really because of the running back room, which is a good segue to talk about what I think is probably the strongest position group, frankly, in the country at running back. And I think on Notre Dame across any position group, it's got to be Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. My first question that I spent a lot of time researching is Jeremiah Love really a Heisman candidate? And again, if you're following on YouTube, we've got this graph pulled up. And the answer is he's a candidate, but he's a dark horse. And it's worth spending some time on just how special he is when we compare him to Ashton Genty, Derrick Henry, Christian McCaffrey, and Bryce Love, the four other running backs who've been a Heisman finalist in the last decade. Only one winner in Derrick Henry. And he's right in the mix with those guys in terms of what they did the year before they won the Heisman, and even in the year they won the Heisman. Jeremiah Love's campaign last year would have been really second only to Bryce Love in yards per carry. His touchdowns would have been right in the mix with all those other guys with 17 scores. The big question that could hold him back from a legitimate Heisman campaign is just the number of carries he gets. Marcus Freeman is on the record. He wants to protect running backs in college. He wants them to have successful NFL careers. He thinks that's the right thing to do as a coach. He thinks it's the right thing to do for long-term player development and recruiting. He thinks it's a way to get more guys in the building, knowing there's not just going to be one bell cow, but 2-3 guys can get meaningful carries and get tape for the NFL. I think that's a great strategy in modern college football. The reality, though, is that Jeremiah Love had about 170 carries last year. You compare that to Ashton Genty, who had over 350. Like, Ashton Genty had twice as many carries as Jeremiah Love last year. Derrick Henry had almost 400. Even Christian McCaffrey and Bryce Love, who were lower than those two guys, were still over 250. All those guys were getting 20 carries a game. Jeremiah Love's getting like 10. Now, will Jeremiah Love's snaps go up by way of Riley Leonard not being there to run the ball all the time? Probably. But is it going to go to 350 carries? Doubtful. And so I think that's probably the biggest reason why Jeremiah Love is going to be in the Heisman candidate conversation. But I think Notre Dame fans should probably temper expectations. It's not a running back award. And it's especially hard if you're just not getting enough touches with the football to really go and win that award. That doesn't take away anything from Jeremiah Love when you start looking at advanced stats in really any category. Missed tackles, yards after contact, explosiveness, just one of the best running backs in a long time in college football. Clearly, I think the front runner to be the best running back in college football this year, and just a special guy to get to watch wear a Notre Dame uniform.
Totally. He's a dark horse. His talent as a running back, I think, holds up with all of these guys. And you can see that, Brett, as you mentioned, with the advanced stats, his yards per attempt, how many touchdowns he has with the amount of attempts he has. It's very impressive. But I'm with you, Brett. I think it's just the raw volume of carries just isn't there. You really need a minimum of at least 250, and I would be surprised if he gets 200. That seems like a I mean, that is still a pretty sizable uptick. That would be the most I could see him getting, unless there's some drastic change in how we're using him. And even last year, Jeremiah Love was getting worn down by the end of the year. He was not fully healthy against Penn State and Ohio State, or even against IU for that matter. So I would say the path for him winning a Heisman would be, I mean, one thing is that he does have these highlight reel moments that really stick with you. So there's a narrative component to the Heisman. So if he's able to pull together a bunch of those, build on his yards per attempt even more, and maybe he gets like 225 carries, and Notre Dame is a team that's like clearly poised to make a national title run. Maybe you have a shot if it's a very weak year for quarterbacks. I would say that's really the only scenario I could see it happening. But I think a finalist it's possible. I would not bet on him winning the Heisman though. I think it's just, as you mentioned, Brett, it's a quarterback's war generally.
And then that brings us to Jadarian Price, who I think is one of the most underrated guys on this roster. And he's incredible in the advanced metrics, 6.1 yards per attempt. He rushed for 12 plus yards on 17% of his carries last year. So in terms of just chunk run plays, 17% of the time, he was picking up 12 or more yards. Jeremiah Love was only 12% of the time. His yards after contact of 4.5, I mentioned this earlier, was 10th out of 274 rushers in the country. We were, by the way, the only running back room in the country with two guys in the top 25 in that category, being Bryce and Jeremiah Love. So I understand Riley Leonard is no longer back, and he was such an important part of the run game last year. But just the ability for this offense to have Price and Love back, I think just sets such a high floor for offensive expectations. And don't sleep on Ainias Williams. Great pass blocker, played a really big role throughout the season in third down situations, especially in the college football playoff, was critical to getting Notre Dame jump-started in the passing game in the Orange Bowl. He's also back as that third down back again for Notre Dame. I wouldn't be surprised if he plays a bigger role, but we actually see Jeremiah Love in on more third downs. We'll see how that rotation plays out, but I think one of the strongest position groups, as we said, really anywhere in the country at running back. Mike, pulling up our last graph of the day, we're looking at Pro Football Focus grades versus yards last year for Notre Dame wide receivers, including transfers from prior stops. 2 years in a row now, really 3 years in a row, we've been talking about wide receiver being the weak link in Notre Dame football. And last year, the just buzz was, yeah, but they're taking such a step forward. And realistically, didn't meet high expectations. Do we think this is finally the year Notre Dame wide receivers actually break out as a group and really bring together a fully complete passing game?
If 2 years this room was bad, and I think that's fair to say that the wide receiver group 2 years ago was bad, then I would say last year we were probably below average early in the year. And then you could argue maybe by the end of the year we were above average. So split the difference and say we were an average to maybe slightly above average group last year. I think this year we're poised to see another similar jump. That doesn't mean that we're going to be a great wide receiver room. Doesn't mean we're going to be a top 10 or top 15 wide receiver room. But to me, it seems like this group has the potential to be good. And by good, I mean, it could potentially be a top 25, a top 25-ish wide receiver room. And really, I think the reason for that is that our top three wide receivers are better than the top three wide receivers that we've had in these prior years. So I'll start with Greathouse. I think Greathouse is our number one. The question is he an elite impact number one? I think that remains to be seen. Certainly, we saw some flashes of potential against Penn State and Ohio State. Those were the best defenses we played last year, and Greathouse was at his best. He put up big numbers. But it's projecting him to be able to do that consistently on a game-to-game basis. That's something that we haven't seen from him yet. Denbrock last year, when he was talking about receivers he expected to emerge and become stars down the line, would generally mention Greathouse as someone who he thought had that potential. So maybe this is the year where he'll be able to put those Ohio State and Penn State performances together and be a bona fide impact number one. I'm not going to say that he's going to hit that high upside, but I think he's going to play well enough to be our clear number one option here, and a better number one option than we've had in prior years. And then at number two, I would say the second receiver I'm focusing on is Malachi Fields, who was a important transfer who came in from UVA. Very productive at UVA, 2 years of 800 plus yards, graded out. If you're looking at the chart, graded out well, not spectacular. This is not, we're not getting like an Ohio State Jeremiah Smith type wide receiver, but he's someone who's productive at UVA in a power conference. So he's proven it against tough competition. I would call out at UVA, he was the number one option. So when their quarterback was looking to distribute the ball, he was generally the person they were looking at. But that also meant defenses were focusing on him too. So those can kind of offset each other a little bit. But what was, I think, difficult for him to play through was that their quarterback play was not great. So he was not dealing with a great offensive situation generally. So it'll be interesting to see that with a with a better offensive system around him, better offensive talent, is he going to be able to be more productive and maybe grade out a little bit better? I think with him, his upside is someone like a Miles Boykin. That's what a lot of beat reporters have been saying. Obviously, that's very optimistic. But if we can get him performing kind of somewhere in that vein, where he's really effective in 50-50 balls. We can, for certain like possession downs, we can use him to just kind of grab the ball and bring it down. I think that could be a very valuable tool for a new quarterback. So I would say with him, I expect him to be productive. If we get, if things really work out well, maybe he looks kind of like Miles Boykin. That would be a huge lift to the offense, but I wouldn't quite bet on that. And then the final receiver that I'll focus on from my top three is Jordan Faison. And Faison, I guess similar to Greathouse, has had a lot of flashes where he's looked really well. He just hasn't done it consistently game in, game out. And but I think there is an expectation for him to continue to elevate his game and continue to be a more effective and impressive wide receiver. So I think with those three guys, those three are better than any combination I can recall from prior years. Outside of them, I would call out Will Pauling. He's a transfer from Wisconsin. If you're looking at the chart, you can see that his 23 season, he graded out really well. And also was productive from a yardage standpoint. But then last year he had a big drop off. Granted, Wisconsin's offense was not a well-oiled machine and struggled quite a bit. So with him, the question is which Will Pauling are we going to get? So I think with him he's a little bit more of a question mark in terms of the performance we're going to get. But I think for a number 4 wide receiver in that group, I think that's not a bad option to have at all. And then beyond that, it gets even more uncertain. It's one of the younger wide receivers going to step up? Someone that we haven't really seen meaningful contribution from yet.
If I take all of that into what's the glass half full and the glass half negative, the glass half full is that we have 3 guys on this roster that had roughly 600 yards or more of production. If I go back 2 years ago, Jaden Thomas was the number 1 wide receiver to start the room coming off a 360-yard campaign. And the number 2 wide receiver was Chris Tyree, converted from running back. If I go to last year, Bo Collins was coming off about a 400-yard campaign and was the number 1 wide receiver. And then you had, I guess he was around 500 yards. And then you had 3 other guys in the 300 to 400 yards in Jaden Thomas, Faison, and Greathouse. So just the sheer productivity coming back is proven. If I take the glass half empty, it's that Jaden Greathouse really had a great college football playoff. But if we would have lost out to Georgia in a really close, 50-50 game, we would have been talking about Greathouse having a 1 touchdown season for 350 yards. That wouldn't have felt like a number 1 wide receiver. Now I get it. He went and balled out on the biggest stage against Penn State and Ohio State. No one wants to talk about this because he did break his ankles. He played his part in it. But you're 2 Penn State slips away from that looking like a much different stat line. And also don't forget his 2 touchdowns against Ohio State were when Notre Dame was trailing 31-7 late in the second half. So I'm not discounting Jaden Greathouse's potential, but I do think there's some sample size concerns and some maybe reasons to doubt the consistency of the productivity last year. He was battling a hamstring. He was battling, like not injuries that kept him out of games, but injuries that I think if we had a better wide receiver room, I think he probably would have been sitting out. But just even injured, he was the best available. And then the downside for Malachi Fields and Will Pauling is, pretty obvious in that they decided to transfer instead of go to the NFL. Clearly, they aren't generational talent. Excuse me. Clearly, they're not generational talent, or they'd be off playing on Sundays. And they can still be really productive college football wide receivers, as they've proven in their career. But I'm not going to go and anoint them Chase Claypool or Miles Boykin. In fact, I think one of the craziest stats that I saw all offseason in the last decade, of all of Notre Dame's recruits out of high school that were wide receivers in high school, only 2 in the last decade have been drafted in the NFL. And they were Cam Hart and Xavier Watts as players on defense. And so I think Notre Dame fans should believe there's a step up this year. They should believe there's 3 really productive guys at the college football level, all vying for that 1, 2, 3 spot. There's also the reasons to say, hey, this isn't, super straightforward, obvious choices here in the wide receiver room. The last name we haven't mentioned, Mike, I'm curious your thoughts on the tight end group. Eli Raridan, clearly the top guy there. But beyond that, some real limited depth, especially following the news of Kevin Bauman going down with another torn ACL.
Yeah, good call on Raridan. So Raridan's someone who's suffered from injuries most of his career. Very highly touted recruit, very athletic, has projected well physically as someone who could be Notre Dame's next great tight end. I think it's worth noting that when Notre Dame went on their media days in New York, since we don't have conference media days, we go to New York and just meet with a bunch of media outlets. Notre Dame typically brings like their well-known stars, so someone like a Jeremiah Love. Well, they actually brought Eli Raridan with them on that media circuit. So to me, if you're reading the tea leaves, that might tell you that the staff thinks that they know something about him that maybe we haven't quite seen on the field yet. So I think if Raridan can stay healthy, he's someone to keep an eye on, someone who could maybe give us a little bit of a surprise in that tight end room and help elevate this passing game, which would be, Brett, as you mentioned, I think it would be it'd be much needed because look, certainly our wide receiver room should be better. And there's reasons to be optimistic. But as you also mentioned, there are reasons to kind of, hesitate a little bit and not necessarily go all in. But if we get effective tight end play, that just helps round out the passing game a little bit more. So someone to keep an eye on for sure. But the depth does concern me because if he goes down, then we're really, we're really, scraping around, like trying to find like who the heck could possibly fill in and be productive for us at that position.
So then turning to overall expectations for this offense, we were 4th in SP plus last year. Again, for any of our new listeners, you'll hear us talk about SP plus a lot. FEI is another advanced metric system that measures play-by-play data adjusted for quality of the opponent to then really go and calculate how efficient would your team be against the average team in college football on a neutral field. And really, SP Plus is used to predict point spread. So regardless if you lost some close games, if you had a tough schedule, if you had a really easy schedule like Indiana, how do we neutralize all that data and say, hey, rank and stack, if teams are going to go play next Saturday, who should you expect to win? SP Plus slices through all that data and is kind of the epitome of college football analytics boiled into one metric. And Notre Dame was 4th in that metric, bringing a lot back on the offensive line, bringing a lot back at wide receiver, bringing a lot back at running back, with, of course, the big headline being an unproven starting quarterback and an unproven wide receiver room, despite some of that production here coming in. The other thing that I'll say, about as much blue chip talent as Notre Dame has had in a really long time. This is a talented unit. There's depth at every spot. Mike, what are your expectations? Can Denbrock dial in another top 5 offensive unit?
I think there's some volatility, right? So I think anytime you're breaking in a brand new quarterback, one that hasn't had much real live game experience, there's going to be some uncertainty. I mean, we can go through the list of highly touted Notre Dame quarterbacks and how many have not turned out. It's Wimbush, Jerkovich, Chris. It's just the list goes on and on and on. And I'm optimistic about the room right now, Minchie and Carr, whoever ends up winning out. But I think it's definitely worth having a healthy dose of caution before we anoint either of these guys the next great quarterback until we actually see them play. So kind of getting more to my prediction, there is volatility. So I think, you mentioned we were number 4 last year. SP plus, the latest SP plus out of after spring ball had our offense is number 10. And so to me, that kind of feels like a little bit of an average of which way it could go. If Carr ends up or Minchie ends up being an absolute stud, someone who really can elevate our passing game immediately, right? And let's say the mistakes are limited and he just seems to work really well in the system. To me, that it seems like this offense could be, you couple that with our running game and our offensive line, that to me seems like that could be like a top 3 offense, potentially elite, one that could really get you into the conversation of national title contention. But if he looks like a brand new starting quarterback who's kind of figuring it out and turns, either one of them feels like they're figuring it out and turning the ball over, then then I think you see the other side of the coin. And to me, that probably gets us more to maybe around like a top 20 offense. I think our running game and our offensive line, I think it gives us a decent floor, right? I think we could lean on that if we're having a lot of struggles at quarterback, and that's enough to keep us in the top 20. But obviously that's a far cry from potentially being an elite offense. So to me, 10 feels about right, which is where SP plus has us pegged right now. If I had to, kind of pick which side of the coin I'm leaning towards, I would say I'm always hesitant to just bet all in on a brand new starting quarterback when they haven't proven it yet. So I don't, to me, like a top, like offense around number 20 is kind of like the floor's kind of caved in a bit and we're really struggling at quarterback. I would be surprised if we had that, but I think probably maybe a little bit worse than 10. That seems about right to me. I would say that kind of matches my healthy dose of skepticism that I have about like how great our quarterbacks could be, coming into this season from the get go.
I completely agree. It feels like with the offensive line and the running backs, floor is still a top 20, top 25 unit. With a new starting quarterback, sky's the limit if we can put things together. I think this is another top 5 unit. And the reason for that is the passing game explosive last year, which is so critical to being one of these efficient offenses. They need to generate big chunk plays. And we did in the running game, but the passing game brings so much more explosiveness in modern college football. We were dead last, and we were still top 5. Now, a lot of that had to do with taking care of the football. A lot of that had to do with our running backs moving the chains. I think all of that will still be there. If we add an ounce of explosiveness with a better wide receiver room and hopefully Carr and Minchie throwing a better deep ball, which wasn't Riley Leonard's strength, that could unlock an entire dimension that even if we did have some inconsistency, even if we did have a bad game, even if we did have some interceptions because of a young new quarterback, I think adding an explosive element to this offense would go a long way to taking a step forward from what was already an elite unit. The other caution I'll make, and we'll get into this more when we cover Notre Dame's schedule in a couple of episodes, Notre Dame has 2 really tough games to start the year with Miami on the road, maybe not the biggest juggernaut of a defense, but still a really good defense with Mario Cristobal, and then Texas A&M at home, another elite defense. That's going to be really tough 2 games to start for a new quarterback. If you saw the offense sputter for a couple of games, but then light it up in the last 10 games where we don't really play an elite defense in the last 10 games, we could be 12 games into the season going into the college football playoff and not really know what our offense looks like against stiff competition with a quarterback who's then, at that point in the season experienced. I think that's going to be a really interesting storyline of what do these new quarterbacks look like in these first 2 games, and how do you project that come the end of the season if Notre Dame is back in the playoff? That's a big if. We got to go win football games and go on our spot in the college football playoff. But you may not learn a lot about what does an experienced CJ Carr, Kenny Minchie look like by playing USC and Syracuse and Navy and Stanford and Pitt and NC State. And we may have to wait until December to really know what does this offense look like when they go up against marquee talent and have settled in to what this scheme should be with this quarterback. I think that's one of the biggest question marks facing both Minchie and Carr, is not just how do we get through the first 2 games, but how do they grow and compete against really elite defenses that just aren't on the schedule after the second week.
Right. Yeah. I think the passing explosiveness is a really important point, Brett. I mean, you mentioned how like last year we had a lot of run explosiveness, but the pass explosiveness is what really held us back, and we got a little bit more of that in the last couple games of the season. But adding just a little bit of that, really gives Denbrock a lot more to work with. It'll just be how big are the growing pains, especially early. And so I think, like I said, SP Plus has us around 10. I said I'm probably like, around there, maybe like a spot or two lower than that. And it sounds like you're maybe like a little bit more optimistic about the element of the explosiveness raising the profile. But I think I think at this point it's fair to say that we both expect the offense to perform well. If I'm saying the floor is a top 20 offensive unit, that's a
We're
very
speaking similar. Yep.
yeah, that's a very optimistic, outlook for what our offense should do this year.
For sure. So that's a wrap on our offensive preview. We'll be back in the next show to cover the defensive side of the football. Until then, Gyrish.
Garish.